Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak athletes, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Lockdown Tapes. I'm your host, Maltshar, and I'll start off with an apology. Technical issues meant that last week we didn't have an episode. Apologies for that, but we are back. And on this episode of the Lockdown Tapes, we have an interview with Laurence Campbell. Now, Laurence is somebody who we've seen relatively recently in the end-of-year issue at the end of 2020 with the Strontium Dog story that he did with Rob Williams. Now, he's also done a fair bit on Judge Dredd, the Breathing Space Dredd World series, and going all the way back to Synammon and Bison, which were two interesting, if moderately controversial, stories that ran a number of years ago. So he's been with us for some time, but has been away working on B.P.R.D, which is part of Mike Mignola's Hellboy universe. So it was great to actually sit him down and kind of go through his time, his career, the work that he's done for 2000 AD and beyond. Really kind of catch up because from my personal perspective, it's always great to see some new Laurence Campbell artwork. So fingers crossed in the future, we'll be seeing more from him. So without much further ado, we're going to, as always, crack on and hear from artist Laurence Campbell. I realised the other day that it has been 10 years, almost to the day, since we talked for the magazine interview.
Oh my god! Right, okay, jeez.
Because I very specifically remember I'd only just started at Rebellion. I was sleeping in the spare room with some friends who lived in Oxford.
Right.
I hadn't got any of my possessions with me. I think I ended up. I was laid on the futon that I'd been sleeping on, with my phone next to my dictaphone. And it was a crap phone as well. So yeah. I was rereading the feature, and it was a miracle that came out so well, because I didn't hear half of it. But so yeah, I mean, it's been a decade, which is quite scary. I'm always tempted just to go back to the beginning and kind of start there, but I'm interested to as to where you're at the moment, because you did the we had on the podcast last year because you did the little Strontium Dog story.
Yes.
With Rob Williams. I just want to revisit that because there was a lot of chatter online about Strontium Dog, about the fact Carlos is sadly no longer with us, and John obviously doesn't want to write any more unless they're because they can no longer work together. Now that there's been a little bit of distance with that story, how do you? What's your view on it? How do you feel about it now, having seen it in print?
Well, to be honest, the whole thing of that, I kind of, was as I said before, was done out of respect, kind of thing. But it was kind of. I was surprised in a way on when people spoke about it online, and about some people had concerns about it. For me, kind of creators create, as it were, and we weren't going to go and do anything that was kind of going to turn the character upside down, as it were. And I think there's a certain kind of for me, comic creators want to create, so you want to you want that story to continue, as it were, in a way, kind of thing. You might want to curtail it, control it in some way, but there's nothing wrong with for me. Like, it was just seeing something bloom. And I think what was quite nice was also it did remind people of the Star-Lord kind of era, which is what we were totally gunning for. And if it got people to go back, look at that era for the first time, or just reminisce a little bit, that's a nice thing in my book, kind of thing. So that's what I wanted to do. I kind of it was done out of love. Star-Lord, I bought Star-Lord before 2000 AD. So, and it kind of, you know, that to me was escapism and like entering a new world. And if I could just tap into that, which I feel like we did in some way, then I came away happy from that, really.
Because it's interesting that you both wanted to go back to that Star-Lord point, because the vast majority, based purely on sales, the vast majority of people will have known the 2000 AD version. The Strontium Dog that I read was the stuff that was in the Best of 2000 AD Monthly, which was Rage and things like that. So I find it fascinating that you got this personal connection to the very early stuff.
Yeah.
How looking at it again before we had this chat, I was really struck about, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, how much Carlos's early work, so his kind of late 1970s stuff, his Battle, his Star-Lord, things like that, is actually reflected in your style. I see a connective tissue there. Yes,
well, I mean, first of all, I think doing the Star-Lord version, as it were, gave us a bit of distance as well, because the costume is different, kind of thing. Do you see what I mean? And it feels like there's a period of a time that's a difference as well. So I don't feel like I was treading on anybody's toes in some way on that kind of thing. And then you've got also, I kind of obviously had to kind of go back, look at the stories, look at the costume and things like that. And man alive, it was kind of Carlos kind of developed his style, but back then it was incredibly detailed and it was a lot dirtier. And I think I feel comfortable when I kind of when my inks can be a little bit dirty, as it were, kind of thing. So I think that, and the setting it was in, like doing it in a cowboy setting and really harping back to what it was originally, as it were, I think that helped us as well. So kind of what I appreciated, I came away afterwards, was how much, I mean, I realized that Carlos was a great artist and could draw anything, kind of thing. But what I got from it was the details and the subtleties that were in his work, kind of kind of then as well, kind of thing. That really worked for me.
When the Search and Destroy volume came out last year, I was struck by how vivid the colors were, because I'm used to having seen the Brendan McCarthy early Strontium Dog stuff, where great color sense, great design sense. But then you look at Carlos's stuff, and the artwork is very visceral. The color is just, I mean, it slaps you around the face, even accounting for it having been printed on effectively toilet paper. It's still bang. Still right in your face. Did you try to reflect that when you were doing this new stick? Because I noticed that the colors were very vivid.
Yes. We decided just to do the 2 pages in color, kind of thing, again, to hark back to the Star-Lord. But then I spoke to Dylan about what I was looking for. So we had a kind of phone call. I hadn't spoken to him for ages. It was always good speaking to Dylan. And I was saying that I wanted strong colors. I said almost like concept art, film concept art is kind of, and I said, if he wants to burn out my blacks or kind of knock them back or do them, just see my artwork as part of the palette, and then you can do what you want on top, as it were, kind of thing. And I said, don't see it as kind of like a, I can't touch it, I can't mess with it too much, kind of thing. And then, he pretty much hit the spot on every time when color, the colors were great. And then we went into black and white. And I think 1 or 2 times I pulled him back a little bit, where he had maybe too much light shining in through the roof and things like that. And I say, well, maybe knock that back a bit. But that's what I enjoyed working with him. There was this feedback kind of to each other, kind of thing. And that's for me when it was quite exciting. And when I was getting the pages, I was excited as well, which was really nice. I don't know, drawing 20 odd years and I'm still getting excited about getting pages through is really good. And as I said to Rob before starting his script, when he got it, I was like, oh my God, I'm really nervous about starting this. So I kind of realized that there was a certain sense of importance to this character. and kind of so it was a whole blast. I really enjoyed it.
I think I might have mentioned it at the time. For the full Carlos experience, what you should have done, the last panel on the last coloured page should have been half finished.
Yes, that black and white bit kind of thing. Yeah. I love all that.
That's one of my favourite stories about Carlos. He just gets to that point. Someone goes, "Oh, by the way, it's not all meant to be coloured," and he just stops. Like,
I'm ending it there.
I mean, you mentioned westerns there, and I mean, Rob's obsession with westerns is well known. But I did just talking about getting Dylan to kind of knock out the blacks occasionally. The colours really felt like almost like a Kodachrome kind of film print in the colours are almost kind of throb with intensity. When you were drawing it, because obviously very much on those colour pages, it's a Sergio widescreen Sergio Leone Western opening right there. How much is it difficult to kind of balance what about Carlos plus all the Western tropes, all the Western stereotypes, plus serving that script in the way that it had to be served? Yeah,
well, Rob's scripts are generally quite tight. I mean, he kind of puts in camera angles and things like that kind of thing. And so with that script, he referred to the film and kind of like I had to go and look at that. So you're using that as your balance. Your widescreen, when you do widescreen, you're slowing the viewer down. So because like the panel is going from left to right. So we purposely, Rob wanted the whole thing to be widescreen. So that slows the viewer down. So you're able to, your eye tracks across the page, as it were. So I tried to play full extent on that. But that also makes it, you have to be quite careful on where you put the word balloons when it comes to this, because on how you're going to follow it across. And you can't have too many people talking back because it will just cram the widescreen panel. Where if you do more of a, should we say, a vertical panel, you can have all the text just above it. So you have to be kind of quite thoughtful on that. So the widescreen part of it, that just automatically makes it like a Western. And then what I've done for Dylan, I've done the black and white artwork on the page, and then I put some grayscales on top, like watercolors and things like that. And I said to Dylan, use these if you want. If you don't, feel free to discard them. And they'll be used, they were there as a reference tool, as it were. So like, for example, there's some grayscaled up on top was dust and things like that. And it was down to Dylan whether he wanted to use what I'd done as the dust or make his own dust, as it were, kind of thing. But as long as he got that kind of the style that I was looking for, I was kind of fine with it, kind of thing. I think at one point Dylan kind of texted me saying something like, "You don't ask for much, Laurence, do you?" kind of thing, which is quite funny. But then you see Dylan's own pages and he puts everything in them, kind of thing. So
that is a bit rich from him.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's really interesting. I wonder, and they might not tell you whether colorists find your work easy, difficult, middling to color, because, and we'll come on to talk in more detail about your style. One thing that for me has always seemingly defined it has been, without wanting to sound too wanky, a tension in the lines. The quite often, as you're drawing a figure, it's not necessarily really obvious where the figure. The edges of the figure start, particularly if there's lots of light influence from this from around them. So have you had any feedback from colorists going,
I can see colorists not liking color in my work, if I'm honest, because I don't leave that much to color. It's like, and I don't know whether that's the control freak of me or what kind of thing. And I know that I feel insecure if I leave it too open. I know it could, the way that coloring's done these days, it would be fine. But I think in black and white. I know that sounds daft, but I think that goes all the way back to the old Marvel reprints, which I first picked up as a kid, and 2000 AD. So, that was black. They were both black and white as a kid. And so I think of that. And I also, one of the first things I do when I get the script is I'm obviously pacing it out, making sure I'm saying what the script wants, but I'm also thinking of the lighting and where the light source is coming from. And then I kind of question myself. It's kind of a bit of an Alex Toth, but it was also something I read when I was teaching for a while about what needs to be in the page and what needs to be said. And kind of you just take away the things that don't need to be said, as it were, kind of thing. And in my case, I'm taking them away and I'm blacking them in. So do you see what I mean? So it starts black and then I bring in the whites, is kind of, so that's generally how I work. But light source is something that plays an important part to me. So that the Strontium Dog, as soon as they go into like the whole, like the house part of it, as it were, kind of thing, I wanted light coming in from the busted ceiling and things like that. So that helps me construct like the setting, I guess, kind of thing, which then brings the mood. So yeah.
So often in black and white artwork, artists, and this isn't a criticism in any way, shape, or form, use light quite as a demarcation, as a very clear, sharp lines between light and dark. I guess it's a noir influence there, but also, it keeps things very straightforward. But with some of your light sources, and I'm thinking to the work you did on Punisher.
Yeah.
Feels almost like quite diffuse, that it's not just the light coming in and hitting the object, it's the light rebounding off the object as well. Is that is that a conscious thing? Is it just the way you draw, or is it a way of creating a certain amount of atmosphere?
Well, I think it's a lot to do with Punisher. It was a lot to do with tension. So a lot of Punisher, I used a black border. So that automatically brings in the page, kind of thing. So there's a sense of isolation, as it were, kind of thing, having the black border around the whole thing. And then merging I saw kind of Punisher rather as a human being. I saw him as a kind of tour de force kind of thing. He's like a kind of an object, like an indestructible object that's just coming at you. Very much like It Follows, like the film It Follows. It's just like a presence that's just coming towards you.
That film just fucked me up good and proper.
It is, isn't it? I mean, that film, I think, many levels. That film is kind of anxiety. It's a physical form of anxiety, depression, and just everything else. And I think for that, it's a really great horror film. I really do kind of rate it. But that's that kind of presence is what I wanted on Punisher when I was starting it. And when I look back at previous Punishers, I don't like it when the Punisher just stands there in like a black stroke blue costume and he looks too superhero-y and everything's a bit bright and garish and a bit too obvious. To me, the only time you see Punisher's face was when you're about to die, as it were, kind of thing. Do you see what I mean? He's kind of like, and that itself is that whole thing about not seeing the monster is more scary than actually seeing the monster, kind of thing. And that's what I wanted to bring with Punisher. So when I drew the Punisher, it was even to the point where I think I gave him gloves a lot of the time so that he leaves no mark, as it were. So he just comes in, he kills what's got to be killed, and he gets out, kind of thing. And he's, the man is just fucked up in the head, kind of thing. So that's what I wanted. I wanted that kind of edge. And normally when I do this kind of stuff, when I get a script, I can only really work on one script at a time, and I totally immerse myself in that subject matter, kind of thing, and maybe even think about it more than I should do. And so when I was working on B.P.R.D, for example, I was literally just thinking of monsters and destroyed cities for about 7 years. And then you come out of that and you're doing something else. And it takes a while to come out of these things before I immerse myself into the next one. So Punisher was all about kind of darkness, reflected light, kind of shadowy faces. It was kind of that's what I wanted to bring into that book.
Mm. One thing that really strikes me looking back at your stuff is how rarely you draw eyes.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean you never draw eyes,
No.
but one of the kind of the moments, one of the scenes that I think is archetypal Laurence Campbell is basically the hooded gaze, the shadowed eyes,
Yeah.
full of threat, and I see that in your Punisher work.
Yeah.
Even the Deadpool stuff that you did, especially, but also in Dredd, the Dredd story about where it was basically revisiting. What was it called? Where they were going to
the one with Rob.
Yeah, where they were going to use pills to sedate.
Oh yes. I know the one you mean. Yeah, I know the one you mean.
There's a wonderful moment in that where one of the characters is you get a nice tight focus on their face, and they're smiling, but the face is still somehow, you can see the face, but it's still somehow in shadow.
Right, in the shadow.
That for me is a moment that you clearly enjoy.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do enjoy the shadows, and I enjoy the distortion that the shadows can bring. If you see what I mean, it can bring in another world. But then I don't know if you look through. I feel like some of my work, I do eye shots, but they're generally in a moment when it's like, oh shit, this is going to happen or whatever, and the guy's just realizing his pupils dilate and whatever else, as it were, kind of thing. So for me, there's like certain moments that you kind of like you bring it in, as it were, kind of thing. I do hide in the dark. Maybe that's kind of. Yeah, I mean, at one point I was thinking of challenging that with myself. We're thinking to myself, I'll just do a book that's just pure line work, as it were, to kind of, should we say, counterbalance or see. But I mean, one of those things where everybody knows the kind of work I do now, and they want that. So do you see what I mean? So I don't get the opportunity to kind of explore so much.
I mean, that's something straight out of noir, isn't it? The distortion of the face through shadows. So you in the light you may see someone whose face looks perfectly normal and even beautiful, but then the second you get some shadows on it, and it completely distorts.
Exactly, and that's the kind of thing that I enjoy. I like the double take. I'm in the world. I like the world of like almost like Twin Peaks, where if you look at the corner of your eye, the world isn't quite as normal as if you look straight on. Yeah. And I like the normal world, but I like every now and then gazing over to that side where that kind of affects you in some way or another. That's what I enjoy.
One huge aspect of your work, and we talked about it when I interviewed you for the magazine, is your design sense.
Yes.
Now, let's now go back
okay
to the beginning, because that's basically the background that you come from, isn't it? An advertising design. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, sure. So left school at 16, managed to get a job as a runner in a graphic design company in London, and just off of Oxford Circus. So I was 16-year-old in London, first job, was really exciting. In the mid 80s to late 80s, and I used to just kind of, if I wasn't delivering packages or whatever else, I used to just sit next to people that used to just draw with magic markers. This is all pre-computer, and I used to just watch them design pages, as it were, kind of thing, design adverts, and it was that side to me that really, really appealed to me. The design side of it, the thoughtful design, the connecting of imagery or shapes and bringing them in, kind of thing. And that's what I tried to bring to the page. I naturally feel that way, as it were, if you see what I mean, kind of thing. I kind of, it's not necessarily two, but I do feel with a lot of artists, you can split them between those that are kind of design orientated and those that, should we say, that just naturally draw really figuratively. Do you see what I mean? And I think for me, I probably hide some of my drawing skills behind the design side of it, kind of thing, but also know that that's one of my strengths as well, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So I still, to this day, I still take an interest in like design and, take an awareness of it.
Because it was interesting revisiting what I've written for the magazine, because you very much wanted to be an artist. You were a former Kent Young Artist of the Year.
Yes.
I don't know whether I should tug my forelock or not at that.
Oh no, take it.
And like, you know, you're entering competition, and I had a conversation with a listener on email where one thing they'd picked up from particularly the lockdown tapes over the last year has been how many artists went to art school,
Right,
and chafed against
yes,
its restrictions, but how there were some who you know, found an element there, and I think you fit halfway between those two things, because you know you and you know, do tell us about it rather than me explain it. You picked up a lot the advertising side of things from advertising, and then you went to St. Martin's College. But you know, so you learned stuff from that process, but at the same time you were aware that was still a restrictive place.
Very much so.
Your ambitions.
Yes. So kind of after 7 years of working in advertising, I was seeing a lot of portfolios that were coming in from students, and the work, if I'm honest, was really quite exciting kind of thing, but they didn't have much of it after doing what I thought was like 3 years work. So I made that decision. I wanted to leave. I was getting a little bit frustrated with advertising, and so I thought I'd be able to march straight into Central St. Martin's, and the arrogance of that is unreal. And so I went and I got an interview, to see what they would think. I was thinking to myself, oh, I'll go straight into the second year. And they looked at it and just went, no, your work is far too tight and far too commercial. You need to do a foundation course. So I went, okay. And I had some life drawing, which I continued doing. I'd done the foundation. I got into St. Martin's, done the foundation course, and then done 3 years. And I absolutely had a ball. I absolutely enjoyed it all. I embraced art college. It opened up my boundaries, kind of done all the things that university should do. And I just explored it. But I was also in the evening, as well as doing my college work, I was going home and drawing comics. And never the twain did they meet. So I never showed any of my any of the members of staff any comic work that I'd done. I kept them two entirely separately, because I knew that if I'd taken my comic work into art college, they would have just ripped it apart. It's not what they wanted. I knew what they wanted. They were kind of, I feel like Dave McKean is a walk-in art college, if you see what I mean, kind of thing. And he's influenced so many people that go to art college. And I tapped into that, and, you know, kind of, I've realized that. So I just embraced as much as I could at art college of all these different kind of skills and whatever else. And then I kept my comic stuff quite separate. If I'm looking back now, I think comics have now opened up so much that you could probably take kind of what you do at art college, and, you know, there's more of a welcome with comics now, and it goes both ways. Colleges accept it more now as well, but back then it was definitely poles apart. And I think my comic work harps back, should we say, to a more traditional time of storytelling, and the kind of the way that I draw, shall we say, kind of with the more sense of realism. And what I'd done is I used my influences that I picked up at college into my comic work, but still kept what I firmly believe in my comic work the way it is. But I was drawing. So when I was in the first year kind of studying graphic design, I had printed by Caliber Comics something like a 30-odd page comic, which I penciled, inked, and lettered. So, and at that point, I learned very quickly, this is hard work kind of thing. But I'd also learned on the job. So as I was going on, I was kind of learning kind of thing.
Let's take a step even further back and talk about the kind of comics you were reading, because you, I'm rather envious of the fact that you were a kid in this in this heyday. You know, in hindsight, we can see the cracks starting to appear in the British industry, but certainly in the 1970s.
Yeah.
You got this incredible flowering of talent and on titles that were changing things. Obviously, Battle Action 2000 AD,
Yep.
also things like the Girls comics. And the artist I think I would most closely align with your style is Sean Phillips.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Yes.
Started his career in drawing comics for girls.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the kind of comics you were drawing and how that has, as you say, filtered through into your style now.
So I can remember my mum buying me kind of, it'd be like a Spider-Man black and white reprint, British Marvel kind of thing. And I would just consume anything. So I'd buy that. If they didn't have that, I would buy maybe occasionally I'd buy kind of a comedy book, Beano or something like that. But Warlord, I was a member of the Warlord Club, kind of. But I used to just consume comics, kind of pick any of those up. Then I came across Star-Lord, issue 1, which is always great to start with, as it were, kind of thing. You got a sticker with it, which I thought was amazing. And what I loved about, I can actually remember being in the shop and flicking through and thinking, what do I want? Because like on the sticker, it had like, are you going to be a pilot, mech trooper? What? And one of them was skateboard squad. And I remember thinking at the time, that's ridiculous. They're not going to have skateboards in the future. And I poo-pooed it. This 7-year-old or wherever I was, just poo-pooing skateboard squad. So I found pilot because I loved the Han Solo at the time. And I just thought, that's me. And I just fell in love with Star-Lord, frankly. And what I loved about it being an anthology is that each one just showed me like a different door to a different world, which I absolutely enjoyed. So I can't say that I bought it regularly because I just didn't, there's a lovely sense of naivety when you're young of you don't know when the comics are coming out. So there was this kind of random effect of just coming into the newsagents and there was another issue, which I would then buy kind of thing. So I bought some random issues of that, which, is definitely a kind of, should we say, a base to me kind of influences, as it were. Then I picked up an issue of 2000 AD when it connected with Star-Lord kind of thing. And then, to be honest, since then, I've been buying 2000 AD. So I'll get in 2000 AD kind of thing from then on. And, when it hit 2000 AD, beforehand, Strontium Dog was my main hero in it. But when it hit 2000 AD, man alive, there was so much in that kind of book. Day the Lord Died, I think, was on when I was kind of picking that up, which to this day is still my favorite kind of Dredd epic kind of thing. Dredd is gets shot in the head, is as hard as nails, driving a bike, the whole thing about the underground, Fergie, it's just like ace. But then I also, at the same time, I used to go through waves, and I think you do this as a kid where you jump onto like little things that you're really into for short periods of time. And I was into Dredd. Then I remember being massively into Dan Dare. Dave Gibbons' Dan Dare was like huge to me when that kind of came along. I absolutely loved that. And then I also remember at the back of it, they used to have like things about what the future would be like. And as a 7-8-year-old, I believed that I worked it out by the age of 2000. I think I would be 30 something. And I was like thinking, I'll be that pilot kind of thing. I actually was convinced that that was my future. Obviously, it wasn't. But I really kind of, 2000 AD was a base, and there was so many artists at that point that were really influential. But one that kind of, Dave Gibbons was kind of like the British standard for me, kind of thing. Brian Bolland, I found like really hyper detailed, and I absolutely adored it. But I used to find his work a little bit scary as well. It was almost like hyper real and a bit surreal because of that. But Marn was like a powerhouse. But if I'm honest, as a kid, I didn't quite get. Same with Kev O'Neill. He used to kind of scare me a little bit, his work. But again, I didn't quite get his work. I remember Gary Leach having a big impact on me as well. The VCs, again, I absolutely love the VCs. And it kind of later on in life, when I was kind of dabbling with comics on my own. Just I created a VC's one page comic, which I remember, which was the VCs getting back together years later, kind of thing. And I drew a Judge Dredd as well, and it was the Judge Dredd one page thing that got me at the London Cartoon Centre, where David Lloyd, Kev Hopgood, and Dougie Braithwaite taught.
Yeah, I mean that that's something. This over the course of having done the podcast and interviewing us, the number of not just 2000 AD people, but just comics people in general who came through that program at the London Cartoon Centre is quite extraordinary.
Really? That's great.
That I'd never really heard of before.
Yeah,
it crops up an awful lot for
wow. Okay,
certain generations of British comic book artists. Because in terms of what you learn there, obviously, if you're into comics as a kid, you build up certain versions of how things work in your head. Was it a bit of a kind of a shock at the practicalities of it, or was it like a nirvana where all of a sudden, like just like at art school, your vistas opened up?
If I'm honest, what I remember about it mainly was just going there and talking comics with people, kind of thing. Kev Hopgood used to bring in pencils of Below Zero, I think it was, or something like that kind of thing. He brought in some pencils from that. Which was the first time I'd seen pencils. I hadn't seen, this is, I'm saying like a dinosaur now, pre-internet. So there was very little kind of information about what was out there. And then I remember at the time, the 2000 AD and Marvel submissions were you had to use a brush, you had to use a ball to draw on. And I believed all that. So I tried using a brush and was an absolute nightmare. Trying to get hold of the board was tricky. And then I realized further later on that you could draw on once later on, you could draw on anything, as it were, kind of thing. But the biggest revelation came to me, not from the London Cartoon Centre, was, I can't remember where I saw it now, but I saw somebody's artwork with patches. And it was the patches that made me realize that you could make a mistake. And it wasn't the end of the world, as it were. You could stick something over it. Where beforehand, I felt that the whole page had to be this almost like the finished thing, as it were. And I know there's artists out there that do that kind of thing, that have these, the finished page is the finished page, as it were. But very quickly I realized, if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. And you can use pens as well as brushes, or, do you see what I mean? And that it was those little moments that were revelations. That and seeing Zenith in 2000 AD was a massive eye-opener for me, because you said about Sean Phillips. If I'm honest, I would say Steve Yole's Zenith was more of an influence on me back then. But what I could understand with Steve Zenith was the storytelling. I understood his storytelling. I got the camera angles that he was going for, kind of thing. And that really was like the magic moment that kind of suddenly things opened up.
I mean, absolutely. You look at Yole's work, and so many of those lines are the implication of form as a
exactly. And you see what you said earlier about kind of like the blacks blending in, and about you can just add a line and things like that. I think that's what I picked up from him. I kind of picked up this, and just everything clicked into place. Not, it didn't come along immediately, but in my head, I was kind of thinking, yes, this is the path. I need to follow this path for a little while. And what happens is that on your journey, you see other artists, and then they lead you to other artists. So I think I went Steve Yole, and then I think I went Alex Toff, and then I read about Alex Toff, and he had that whole thing about blacking things in and just showing the things you need. And then I saw John Paul Leon's work, and just all these things bolted on to kind of what I kind of was working with. And I think also, like what you said about Sean's work, and shall we say probably what you're connecting at also there is the realism part of it, is the thick and thin line and also the realism line is something that they use in advertising. If you go back and have a look at advertising illustrations that are around about late 60s, 70s kind of thing, they use this thick and thin line and also just the way that they draw people. And that's, I think Sean picked up on that, and it's something that I definitely picked up on.
There's a line from Toth. I can't remember what it is now. It's basically decide what's important,
yes,
and strip everything else away.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a fine artist that said the same thing as well. He's like a fine art stroke graphic designer really early on. And there's this story where he drew a box. He was told to paint advertise, as it were, a box of matches, a certain brand. And he drew them on a table with a glass and whatever else. And then slowly over time, he questioned whether he needed the glass there or whether the glass was a distraction. So he painted out the glass. And then he questioned whether the table and the tablecloth needed to be there because of the matches, as it were. And he painted out. So all he was left with was the matches at the end. And this thing was considered kind of amazing at the period of time because he just had it spot on, as it were, kind of thing. And I was reading that out to my students. And then I'd have one of these moments of like, oh my God, this is it. This is like, take out what you don't need, keep what you just need. And I went with that.
I mean, you were teaching at a pretty early age, having been in advertising, working at St. Martin's, and then teaching. Do you think was that a help or hindrance? Because I know when we talked for the Meg, you talked about taking that leap into freelance life.
Yes.
Surrendering the PAYE.
Yeah.
Was the teaching work useful to give you time and stability to work out what you wanted to do, or was it a comfort blanket, as it were, or both?
I think it was a bit of both, if I'm honest. I mean, first of all, I love teaching, and if I get the opportunity to go in to do a day or whatever else, I would still do it, because what's really nice, you go into a class of younger people there, and the vibrancy and the hunger for information and looking for something new, you just come away. Although I'm kind of older and tired when I come out now, you still get that buzz, you get that excitement, as it were. So the teaching I was doing was 2 to 3 days a week. So it gave me the rest of the week I was drawing at 2000 AD at that time. So I was kind of 3 days in teaching, and then I was drawing 7 days a week. Sorry, I was working 7 days a week. So I was teaching for 3 days, and then the 4 days I'd be drawing for 2000 AD. And I guess it did become a bit of a comfort blanket because of the jumping. I remember speaking to Jock, maybe one of the Dreadcons, and he was surprised that I still had should we say, a daytime job, as it were. And he said, no, you should kind of go. And it was when I started working for Marvel, and Marvel agreed to give me like an exclusive 5-year contract or 4-year contract or whatever it was. I thought, now's the time to give this a go. And yeah, it was kind of a scary jump because I had like a mortgage and everything else, but you got to do it, kind of thing, because you can't live in regret. And, I can touch wood to this day, it's worked out okay.
I'm reminded of when I was a child, and I was into art and comics.
Yeah.
And the question that was always asked, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
And the expectation always was that I would do something creative, but always the jobs that were suggested were things that were practical. So it's like, why don't you think about going into architecture, or why don't you think about going into design? It was always kind of like
I know exactly what you mean.
Around the side of the thing that industry that I wanted to work.
Yeah, no, I was totally with you, because I was at school kind of, and you do the careers test, tells you where to be, and it came out bricklayer, or I think the other thing that came out was kind of gardener. But it was only gardener because it was probably a hot sunny day when I'd done the test, and I wanted to be outside, as it were. But it did narrow. I mean, I always knew at an early age I wanted to draw, as it were. Okay, and but of course, you kind of get told very early on that, in that case, if you want to draw, you've got to do graphic design. That's where the money is, as it were. Not like the ton of money, but that's where the work is, as it were. And I knew I wanted to draw comics, but to me, somehow I built it up as such a pedestal that it was in the equivalent of being an astronaut. It was like something that I would never be. Yeah. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll be a graphic designer. But the problem for me was, as much as I enjoyed the kind of my time there, totally appreciated, and I learned a stack of skills, there wasn't that much drawing to be involved, and it wasn't as creative for me as it could have been, as it were, because you come up with a creative idea and then the client always like knocks it down to about 2 pegs, as it were. But with comics, it's purely creative. You get given a script and then you're off and running, and it doesn't get bigger than that. And I absolutely adore to this day that potential of getting that piece of paper through, describing something, and then you having to deliver.
When you were younger, I mean, you've mentioned this already. You did Something Inside, which was this 24-page thing that eventually got published by Caliber, who's one of those companies that kind of flourished in the post-deadline 1990s, only to one by one all fold. Yeah. Was there an element in that moment of thinking, fantastic? I mean,
I don't even think that now. But there's like mini achievements on the way, like little goals, as it were, kind of thing. My main goal, and I didn't need to go any further than this, was to work for 2000 AD. That's what I wanted. Okay, so kind of Marvel was kind of should we say 2000 AD was the moon. And then beyond, I hadn't even thought about, kind of thing. I just wanted to get to the moon. And so, what should we say? When I'd done Something Inside, that was the time of Crisis, Revolver, maybe Deadline, early Vertigo, maybe even before it was called Vertigo, or just at the beginnings of that. And that's what I was kind of leaving the superhero stuff behind. And I was kind of going for the more, should we say, gritty, edgier kind of stuff was what I was looking for. And we tried all the companies in the UK, and I went to Forbidden Planet and I just looked at other comic companies that were around, and Caliber was one of them. I sent it off and they published it, and I was like over the moon. I made little of, and I mean very little money on that kind of thing. But it's that rolling ball kind of situation where that then got me my next thing. So I was drawing a couple of strips for like an anthology for 2008. For Caliber called Negative Burn, and I'd done a couple of those while I was at art college. And then I'd done something that was going to be published for Caliber, but somehow Caliber done a deal. It ended up being published with Image called Disciples, and it was. I remember that showing the pencils of that to Dave Bishop at Bristol. And he just flicked through it and went, yep, you're good, you're ready, kind of thing. He goes, I'll give you something. And I was like, great, okay. And then I didn't hear from him for ages. And I just thought, he kind of just didn't mean it, kind of thing. And then I sent him a polite email, and he was like, oh my God, I forgot about that. Yeah, totally. And I apologize. And then he sent me a John Wagner Dredd, at which point I kind of got so excited, I ran around the park because I was just full of nervous energy. But to this day, I still don't feel like safe within like the comics world, as it were. I still to this day think kind of fear for the next job and make sure that every job I do is the best I can do for the next one. There is no, and I'm still looking to improve or find other things that will help me improve. So that's this moment I've got this whole thing of like, do I get a Cintiq? Shall I explore that? And do you see what I mean? But I still enjoy drawing on paper, because for a long time I was inked by other people, and I kind of feared inking myself, because I was told like a few times, oh, your pencils are good, but your inking is appalling. So I believed it to the point where I just didn't want to ink myself. But then when I started working for Marvel, Axel's, I sent him through some roughs, and he said, who inked these? And I said, me. And he goes, never get anybody else to ink yourself again. And that was the moment, the big moment, when everything fell into place for me, kind of thing, on that front.
Because there is one thing I want to talk about, because it's actually so rare at 2000 AD for somebody to not be inking
Yes.
their own work, and yet for the vast majority of your time at 2000 AD, it was Lee Townsend and also Chris Justice.
Chris Justice, yeah.
And I wondered, in hindsight, do you feel it was a fair criticism of your work, considering what Axel have eventually said?
Right.
What long-term effects that had on the way that you drew?
Okay. Well, I think if you look at the art, you could probably see some similarities, but it does look very different. And one of the things I learned from it is, first of all, it was to tighten up your pencils. So, I mean, you can either take it a positive way or I feel like a negative way when somebody inks you. And I kind of look at it now in a positive way, in the way that being inked by someone else is like somebody else going over your line, as it were. But we all know that the weight of the line, whether you use a brush, a pen, a pencil, charcoal, the mark you put says something, as it were, kind of thing. And so it got me to tighten up my pencils a lot more than I would normally do, as it were, kind of thing, which was a good thing, because then I learned from that, and I think it improved my drawing. But it did get to the point where it was getting frustrating, because it's very difficult in pencils to put down textures. And depending on the inkers you use, you get the inker is in a no-win situation, really, because you want to say to them, follow my lines, but at the same time you also want to say to them, don't stick to my lines, in the way that kind of be inventive, as it were. Because if you stick to my lines, it's going to end up looking dead, or it could look dead, as it were. So it's a really careful balance. So I enjoyed working with Chris and Lee. I learned a lot from it, but I felt the happiest myself when I'm able to ink myself, if that is fair. I think if you ever look at the process, so Bison's inked by Lee, and at that point, if I'm honest, I was working on a kind of 10-part or 9-part for 2000 AD, and I was just enjoying that I was working on a 9-parter for 2000 AD, as it were. So that was just a blast. But if I look back now, there's areas that I wanted texture that there wasn't any texture, as it were. Then I worked with Chris, whose line was a bit more fluid and a bit thicker. And then I worked back with Lee again on breathing space. But what Lee agreed to do was, once he inked the pages, he would send them back to me. And I don't know if this is controversial or what kind of thing. But me and Lee are good now. But I would re-ink some of the bits. So I'd go over the top over what Lee would do. And what I was doing was just roughing it up a little bit and bringing in textures, if you see what I mean, kind of thing. So it was obviously by about my third or fourth job, I was obviously getting unsettled with the final piece of art not looking how I had it in my head, if that makes sense. And if I'm being honest, probably if you go back to my early 2000 AD work with like Bison or whatever else, there was an incredible amount of criticism for that kind of thing. And I think that took its toll on me as well, if I'm honest, in some way. I mean,
let's grasp that particular nettle, because I'd not long been a member of the 2000 AD
yes
online forum when that all kicked off. I mean, it seems almost quaint now that we can remember when a particular controversy. But there was actually, for those who weren't there, there was a lot of criticism of the Bison story from certain individuals, and it was all on a spectrum. So there were some people who just absolutely hated it and laid into it. There were those who had genuine criticisms, who resented being lumped in with the people who absolutely hated it. And then there were various other people who were indifferent, people who actually really liked it. But it kind of very quickly essentially turned into a flame war, where tell us a little bit about, I guess this is a real test for any creative person, where they are seeing very strong opinions about their work. And I can't remember whether it was one of the writers who came onto the forum at the time to defend the strip, but it kind of very quickly spiraled out of control, didn't it?
Yeah, I kind of, I can give you my perspective of it is, so I'd done a Dredd, got given Bison, was overjoyed to have a mini series, in 2000 AD, started drawing it. Just before it came out, somebody had the issue beforehand and gone on and had automatically criticized the amount of creators that worked on it, which was unfortunate because it had two writers, a penciler and an inker, which 2000 AD just normally has a writer, an artist, and a letterist, as it were. And this had over double that amount, as it were. So that was a red flag to some people. The idea of using an inker was another red flag for some people because it then compared it to American comics, as it were, kind of thing. And there's some people that what that seemed to build up, that I do feel that there was a bit of a bully mentality. It was an easy kick-in, as it were. And I found it hard. I didn't go on there, but I was kind of gutted in the way that, kind of, as I said before, a comic artist to me was like a national. And then suddenly I was doing it and I was having a kind of a rough time doing it. And it was difficult because I was still drawing the strip when it was coming out. So it was kind of like, kind of just being slagged off, frankly, kind of like while it was coming out, which was hard. And even if they liked the art, didn't like the story, I'm still connected to it because I'm producing the book. Do you see what I mean? So I did find that really, really hard. And I think I did take it quite personal. I got quite down about it. And I think I went to a DreadCon shortly afterwards, or went to a meeting of some sort. And I was quite low about my own work then. And then I saw Dom and Jock, and they both come up and said that they genuinely liked it and couldn't understand why it was getting so much crap. And I was in my head at that, just before then, I was thinking I might just knock all this on your head. It's not worth the hassle, as it were, kind of thing. But those two people kind of made me realize that actually, well, these are the people whose artwork I like, as it were, kind of thing. These other people were just strangers that I don't know that are criticizing. And if I'm honest, some of them are going to have agendas, because some of them are going to want to be artists, want to be writers, and somebody else has got there and whatever else, kind of thing. And some of them genuinely didn't like it. But Matt had faith in me. The writers had faith in me. And then people like Jock and Dom and things like that had faith in me as well. And it was just those people and people that I saw that I appreciated their artistic talents, that I think that was a moment. But I think I could have quite easily have said, you know what, maybe comics isn't for me, kind of thing. It was very hard. But what I kind of appreciate from it now, if I'm honest, is I don't take any praise or any criticism to heart, either of it. I take neither to heart now. It both is, you can say what you want to me. It doesn't bother me either way, I'm afraid there. So now that if people are nice to me about my work, it doesn't mean anything really.
I've got a list of things here that I wanted to no. I mean, that is one of the great challenges, and it's a challenge that never goes away, and is so particular and personal to each individual creator that you are putting stuff out there.
Yes,
which people either passively consume or aggressively consume.
Yeah.
And that can be a negative and a positive on all sides. And
but I'm not putting it out there. I feel for them. This is I'm drawing it. Yes, I'm drawing it for an audience, but I'm enjoying it because I get lost in that world, as it were. It's what I want to be taken away to another world, and drawing does that to me. And if people, if editors are willing to give me the work, kind of thing, then they've got faith in me. And if kind of people that I would go to, shall we say, look at my work, have got faith in me, then that makes me happy, as it were. And then if other people like it, brilliant, kind of thing. And if they don't, well, I've not robbed them or anything, if you see what I mean. It's kind of, move on.
Yeah. Talking about the whole inking thing, and that had not become a weakness, but you were sensitive to that as a criticism of your work. So often the worst criticisms are ones that we secretly share ourselves. The ones that really break through are like suspicions we have about our own weaknesses. And I guess in that moment that may well have been a particularly barbed one. I'm not inking my own work here.
Yes. Well, I mean, in my eyes, at that point, it was a case of if I don't ink my, I'm not good enough to ink my own work. And the editor decided I need an inker, then that's fair enough, as it were, kind of thing. Do you see what I mean? I'm not imposing an inker on them. I honestly thought I wasn't good enough to ink my work at that point. It was only, and that would be through a lack of confidence.
Yeah.
It was only through kind of Marvel and Axel seeing some of my kind of roughs that I was doing and someone believing in me to ink my work. That I do honestly feel like I flowered, as it were. Kind of my work, everything came together at that point. I think beforehand, as I said, my work I was getting more and more frustrated with it in the way that I was seeing published work that wasn't quite how I wanted. It was, don't get me wrong, I was still happy with it, but it wasn't how I perceived like the final end of it. Like the textures were missing and things like that. And even to this day, inking is now, my pencils are loose enough that the inking is, shall we say, kind of active. It's ongoing. So I'll still ink something, not happy with it, and I'll re-ink like that little patch, as it were, and I'll get the motions that I want the second time. So my inking is it's quite spontaneous. People say to me, "Oh, my artwork looks like it's done effortlessly," kind of thing, as it were, kind of thing. And trust me, it's far from that, but that's the kind of look I'm going for, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's the swan look, isn't it? So
yes, that is totally it. Yeah,
is the thing on the surface.
Yes.
One strip that I did like from this time, and I still get people taking the mickey out of me for it. It's Synammon.
Yeah.
Which I love, mainly because I'm a big fan of the Ian M. Banks novels.
Yeah.
And that I've learned later that was exactly what Chris Clayton and
that's exactly what they were going for. Yes. Yeah.
What are your memories of working on this? How much autonomy did you have in terms of creating the world, and how much was in the script?
Yeah. So they mentioned Synammon to me, and I went up to Grimsby to see them both, and then we.
So sorry.
And so I went up there, spent the weekend up there, and we kind of sat down discussing what they wanted. Again, at that point, I was probably not the most confident of people, so I kind of listened to them. They said about the Banks thing. I was cool with all that kind of thing. And they said the type of character that they wanted, which I was good to go with, kind of thing. And I enjoyed drawing that. The pencils on that I've still got somewhere, kind of thing, like in photocopies. And a lot of them, I would like to ink it now in my style that I'd ink now just for fun. I think that would be quite cool. So I feel like there was a lot of promise in that book. We started, I think I'd done two things of it, kind of thing, and I enjoyed where it was going. But there was a split that was starting to happen with them quite early on, in the way that they wanted more of a Barbarella feel with Synammon, and I didn't want to go that way. I wanted to make her like a female James Bond, like in the books, like a nasty piece of work, if I'm honest. And I wanted to make her a bit more of a kind of psychopath. So if you notice that every time she's attacking something, she's got a big grin on her face. And I wanted her to be a bit more like that, a bit more complicated. And I wanted to go away from the Barbarella and more towards this kind of, as I say, a female James Bond, but gritty and kind of a bit gnarly, as it were, kind of thing. Not overly, but just a little bit more than what it was. And I think we were pulling in slight different directions at that point. not overly so, but just, kind of enough. And it's quite difficult as an artist because it takes so long to draw something that you get connected with someone, as it were, kind of thing. So I'd done Bison with them. I'd done Disciples with them, and I'd done Synammon with them. And I was also at that point looking for other writers to work with as well, kind of thing, to kind of broaden my spectrum and also, kind of push me a little bit. And I read Rob Williams's Class War, and he was all about Marshall McLuhan. And I'd finished art college, and I was all about Marshall McLuhan, kind of thing. And I blatantly went up to him in a Dredd and said, I'd love to do a strip review at some point, kind of thing. And we sat down and we spoke, and we were doing this kind of thing. We were like, oh, I'm not sure about you. So we were discussing about each other's comics that we kind of like, influences that we liked. And we had very, very, very much the same influences, kind of thing. So we had the same kind of thought patterns of like where we were coming from. So I was like, oh, that's quite cool. Oh, that's good. That's good. And then as luck would happen, I ended up getting breathing space with him later on, kind of thing. And that just kind of clicked in, like that for us, clicked into place. That worked for us, both of us, really well. Also, Pete Doherty as well. He'd done the first kind of few pages on that, first maybe issue and a half or something like that, kind of, or 2 issues. And as an artist, that was really interesting because he kind of then was off the book and I was on, but I got to see the scripts for what he had drawn. And so I got to see how he was thinking, if you see what I mean, on doing the scripts. And he stayed on board to do the colors, which I'm thankful for because the colors on that strip are beautiful. And I've kind of got a real big soft spot for that kind of that story. To me still works to this day. And that was that book that got me into Marvel.
Because it's a Western. I mean, the whole Western thing.
It is. Yeah. It's lucky it didn't have a horse in it.
Yeah. Well, the whole shift at the time from Peter's work to yours, as a reader at the time, jarring's not the right word, because that suggests it's negative, but it was different. So the looking at it now, I can see elements of continuity. But as a fan of Peter's work,
I get what you mean. Yeah, I mean, in 2000 AD, generally the person that starts the strip finishes the strip. It's like, and there's been a few occasions, as it were, where it hasn't.
Yeah.
But I get that. But as I said, I would put it down as first of all, kind of, I really was pleased with the coloring on it, but also getting to understand kind of the way that Pete's processing and thinking of it, kind of thing. I did try to, although we draw differently, Pete's really good at the quiet moments. And that's something I picked up on, and I've kind of run with that as well, kind of thing. Kind of like he's really good at like this, like sentimental moments, as it were, not in a negative way. And he done that really well in that strip, and some of those pages. And I picked up on that and ran with that a bit further.
I mean, that's really interesting because you've already mentioned about when you were doing the Punisher, that moment of kind of still horror and still threat. And I want to focus on your storytelling for a moment, and about how you feel you moderate pace and time, and because so many of your pages, there's a nice, in the same way that your inks create, even when it's colored, create a very kind of chiaroscuro contrast between light and dark.
Yeah,
I always feel one of the strengths of your storytelling is the alternating moments of action and stillness.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see if that was a conscious thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's one of those, if I'm honest, between other people talking, like, you realize that what editors are looking for, kind of thing. The things that I generally get told is that, my storytelling, people or writers also quite like the storytelling kind of thing. And and I would put it down to part me, but it's also a lot down to do with the writer as well, if you see what I mean. For me, the shape of the panel is really, really important. The shape of the panel conveys the amount of time, as it were. So for me, and it's also connect they can be connecting points as well. So if you're shifting a scene, then you're coming back to the scene. If you use the same shape panels as you've done previously, it helps with that design sense. So again, it all goes back to design of the page and the storytelling, as it were. I do focus on that, and I'm interested in making it look interesting, but to me, it's got to tell the story. The storytelling is the number one thing. So working with the writer and conveying their story is the number one thing. If that means I get a splash page or whatever else, great. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't.
Is there an artist whose storytelling? I mean, we've talked about Alex Toth.
Yeah.
Who, there's a reason he's so famous. Yeah. Is it somebody like Toth that you have learned this from, or is it a process that you've had to hash out for yourself?
I think a lot of it is to do with just reading a lot of comics. If I'm honest, I think you kind of like if you get somebody who doesn't read comics to kind of read a comic, it takes a while to understand the language. And I think if you do it for a number of years, you start understanding that language. And then I feel like I kind of, a number of times I've been told now that, kind of like, oh, you're a bit of an old school artist. I think I just followed the kind of old school traditions, not completely, but in some of the ways of storytelling. So recently I've been looking at like Lee Weeks, like American artist. I think his way of storytelling is good, kind of thing. And then you got like the masters for me, like Steve Dillon. Kind of, you can make anything, or you made anything look interesting, as it were, kind of thing, to me, kind of thing. And you just stayed with the story, and that to me works well. But it's kind of knowing when to go in, when to bring the camera in. No, I know that some people don't like calling panels cameras and whatever else, but in my head it does work that way. But when you go in with a camera, when you go out with a camera, what needs to be seen, what needs to be blurred, do you see what I mean? These are important to me. I feel, to me, films are as important as comics in a way of storytelling. And I know that irritates some artists, but that works with me.
When you switched to working for Marvel, switched when you started working for Marvel, you'd gone in with a pitch for, was it Sunfire?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Was this a bit of a culture shock?
In some ways, it's something that, because me and Rob got given a Wolverine after the pitch. So we'd done the pitch. We were told we can't use Sunfire, but they said you can use. They gave us a Wolverine kind of one shot straight away, which was very nice. And again, you felt like you was in a bit of the deep end. But Rob had been aching to do something that was 22 pages, where you can linger on the scenes a little bit more. But don't get me wrong, Rob is absolutely kind of at his best in 2000 AD, the 6 pages that you get. But it's a slightly different type of storytelling when you get the opportunity to expand that over 22. And that's what gave us you're able to linger on certain moments, if you see what I mean, a little bit longer on a 22 page. And I think I enjoyed that as well. I mean, it's not uncommon in 2000 AD to have sometimes 6 panels to 9 panels on a page, as it were, kind of thing. Generally on like an American comic, it's like 4 to 6 kind of thing. So, and then some pages you got 2 and 1 kind of thing. Do you see what I mean? So you're able to stretch out the storytelling, and you're able to linger in certain moments. And if I'm honest, I enjoyed doing that as well. The American comics and 2000 AD are 2 very different disciplines, as it were. One of the things I look at, which I marvel at, is like Henry Flint and the amount of panels that he can get on a page. And and the storytelling is all there and everything else. It's just like, it blows my mind, kind of thing. But I which I love, kind of thing. If I'm being brutally honest, I probably felt a bit more comfortable with the Marvel way of storytelling, where I had a little bit longer to kind of tell the story. But coming back to kind of Strontium Dog, that excited the hell out of me. And for years, me and Rob have spoken about doing a 6-part Dredd. We've just always talk about it, but just it's like waiting for everything to connect, and then we'll pitch it to Matt.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your Dredd for a moment, because one of the ways in which people categorize artists on Dredd is always to place Bolland at one end of a scale.
Oh yeah, okay.
Something like McMahon at the
other end. Yes,
everyone has to fit in between those two.
In the two, yeah.
I am going to totally succumb to that binary scale, and that's where you see yourself on that scale.
oh, okay. Well, this is an interesting thing, because a lot of people put Bolland down as realism, okay, and I get why they do that. But if you look closely at his work, there's quite a surreal nature to his work, kind of thing. And McMahon's work again is kind of accentuated moments, kind of thing. So they're both quite accentuated to me in some ways. I think that placing me in that is a tricky one. I think I would add another person in there who, though he didn't do that many Dredds, but I still think is hugely influential to me, and that's Gary Leach. And I put myself on the more realism side of kind of Gary Leach, as it were, kind of, if you see what I mean. It's probably where I see myself. My inks can be a bit rough, so that lends itself a bit towards McMahon and away from Bolland, as it were, kind of thing. But the realism will bring it back the other way. So I'm unsure about this counter. I'm not sure. But into doubt.
It is a completely it's actually completely unworkable.
Yes.
When I see people doing it, it's like, where do you place?
Yeah, you've thrown me.
Carlos on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where do you place Ron Smith? Further towards, but it's always interesting just to try and think how.
I've never thought about it in my life before. I'm going to be thinking about that now for the next day or so.
Well, for me, it's one of those enduring questions about Dredd, is that very, very few artists who really have any impact on the character come to it completely ignorant. If any, in fact, come to it completely ignorant of what has gone before. So, so often, Dredd art, you can read into whether it is pushing against or pulling towards, what has existed.
I think that's true. Yeah,
of the artist. Because your Dredd, not just in its style, but the way you have them, you kind of go for, I think, a very kind of Western style Dredd, in that he's like a block of granite. He's unknowable. He's
right.
The pivot around which the world turns. And having spoken to writers like Rob and Simon Spurrier and Al Ewing, they all talk about how quite often it can be difficult to get into Dredd's head. It can be difficult to give him an internal landscape that makes sense. And Rob's probably the writer that's tried to tackle that one the most with stuff. But in terms of artwork, can sometimes the sheer gravitational pull of Dredd as a character, can that sometimes be overwhelming? Yeah,
totally. And I think that's not just me. I think that I speak to a lot of our artists that have drawn Dredd, and a lot of people are not happy with what they've done, even though it looks fine. And I know, and I'm not going to name names and stuff, but there's some people who've done some amazing Dredds and they're still not happy with them, because they've got this kind of huge monolith in their head of Bolland or McMahon, frankly, or Carlos. And so you're being respectful of that. You want to kind of appeal to that, but at the same time, your nature is not to. So it's quite a tricky thing. And the reason why I've said about me and Rob have spoken, I want to do a Dredd at some point, is because I've done Strontium Dog and I feel satisfied with that. If you see what I mean, I feel like I've done my version of Strontium Dog as well, and I don't feel like I've done that yet with Dredd. If I'm really, really honest, it's still work in progress. I know where I want to go with it, and I know if you say to me, oh, is it going to be more like McMahon or is it going to be more like Bolland? I'm going to tell you it's going to be hopefully a bit more like Brendan McCarthy is what I want. But so I want to go back, and I really want to address that. I do, and we've got this story, but it'll be a case of when. But yeah, to me, Dredd is on my list of unfinished business, if I'm honest. I don't feel like I've completely nailed him on how I want to nail him. And I feel confident enough now, and I think a lot of it was to do with insecurities, but I feel confident enough now to be able to do it and say, this is my Dredd, kind of. Do you see what I mean? Where if I go back, the first one I've drawn, which was that John Wagner script, they published that off my pencils without me even knowing that. That got published kind of like first time I saw that, I was like, oh, I thought they were going to ink it. They didn't. They just colored over my pencils. So, and again, that was the period when I was being inked by other people. So it was a little bit disappointed with that. And then as I've gone on with Dredd, each one I've done, I feel is a little bit nearer to where I want to get it. And I feel like with the Strontium Dog, I was happy with the way that came out. I'll be like, okay, I'm ready for the next one, and I think I'll be able to do it, kind of thing.
Dredd is one of those characters that I think, without any evidence to prove my point, the majority of comic book artists would like a crack at,
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, no, I'd love to draw Dredd. It's on my bucket list of characters.
Yeah.
And then you see takes on it, and again, creating a bit of a false binary. But there are those who kind of can't get over what he is, and those who really run and play with it and do something interesting. Yeah. And quite often, the artists who are able to do the latter of those two options are the ones who play around with the city.
Yes.
Most, it basically turning things around him to try and get an angle. One thing that I forgive me if I'm wrong here, but one thing that you don't do a lot of are detailed backgrounds,
right?
And I wonder if that was a conscious choice to draw attention to the figures in the foreground, because it seems, and this is something that Sean Phillips does do. I noticed, he will reduce backgrounds down to very simple shapes, very simple lines.
Yeah,
and invest all the time and effort in the figures in front of it. Again, I wonder if this was a conscious thing on your part.
I think it is a conscious thing, but I also do think that Dredd is a character where the city plays a really important role. And I think if I was re-looking at it, where normally I reduce the elements because I want them to focus on what I feel is the main thing, which would probably be the figure at the front. I think with Dredd, you can add to the. I mean, I think the city is such an important part to the character that I think you can address that. It's definitely something I wanted to look at, kind of thing. It's like I think you're bang on that with that one, kind of thing. I think Dredd. I think if I'd looked at him again, I think I would add more details into the background, kind of thing. Not necessarily all the time, because I think there is something quite nice about a starkness of it as well, if I'm honest, kind of thing. But certainly kind of on the setup. So maybe the first couple of pages, I think, I would like to show the busyness of the city, because it's such a major part of it. So
it really struck me revisiting things like Punk's Rule, which was the Bolland story after the day the Lord died.
Yeah,
how actually Bolland didn't put an awful lot of detail into the backgrounds. There are backgrounds. There, you know exactly where you are, but it always feels so enclosed.
Right.
The city is like one where the blocks are casting lots and lots of shadow.
Okay. Yeah.
And that if anything, that makes his characters pop.
Yeah. True. I think I would like to also explore color with it as well, like you were saying about black. I would like to do strong black and whites on the Dredd, but I would also like to bring in some really strong colors. Maybe get Dylan on it involved in some sort of another. Just I think that's if it ever happens, that's where I would like to go.
One thing that's and don't want to imply that working at 2000 AD is some kind of clubhouse which you're either in or you're out. But one thing that's kept you away from us for so long has been 7 years on
7 years on BPRD.
B.P.R.D. So spin-off of
Hellboy.
Hellboy. Did you do some Hellboy as well?
I've drawn Hellboy because he kind of appears in some way or another in B.P.R.D. So I have drawn Hellboy a number of times now. Working on that was interesting actually. B.P.R.D. is it's not your traditional American comic. I feel like it's a book that people that read 2000 AD would possibly enjoy, if you see what I mean, because the characters are quite in depth. But you've also got huge bloody monsters everywhere, kind of thing. So it's I do feel like that book could cross over. Well, maybe cross over, but I do think that it would appeal to a 2000 AD audience as well. It felt definitely felt not like a Marvel book, as it were, kind of thing for me. And it was really enjoyable to work on something. When I went on it, I think when I was asked to go on it, I think it was initially just one issue, and then that built. 3 issues. Then it kind of developed a bit further, and then I got a phone call saying, "No, we want you to the end." And then that's really nice because it had a planned ending. It was kind of like it's like a finite story, and that's always good for for me. It means that they've got a story to tell, if you see what I mean, kind of thing, and that felt good. So that was a long time, and that's when that came to an end. That Strontium Dog came about. So
because if there's one artist that truly followed the kind of the Alex Toth thing of strip everything away and you're left with the essence, it's Mike Mignola. I don't know if you listened to it. I had a long chat with Tin and Trevelyan.
He's worked with
he's done some Hellboy stuff. Again, Mike's work is so iconic, it's so distinctive. How much gravitational force does that exert on you when you're doing something like B.P.R.D? Because a guy, the run of B.P.R.D that I read was the Guy Davis stuff, which I absolutely adore. Which was is still very different to Mike's stuff. So I wonder for you, as someone who not necessarily has the same style, but certainly has the same kind of line of thought that Mike has had, how much his work is like a force for or against your
it's an interesting dynamic, really, because first of all, I was kind of absolutely petrified sending pages to him, if I'm honest. So when I was asked to send pages to him, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. And I didn't, but my editor told me, he says, no, you've got to send them to Mike to get them okay, kind of thing. So I was going red as I was sending the send button, kind of thing. But I can't speak for Mike, but I think there's certain sensibilities that Mike has got that I also work with as well. And you could probably take it back to the Alex Toth thing, but it's all to do with kind of boiling down to the essence. It's also to do with shapes, and I think for me, there's a lot of graphic design in Mike's stuff as well, kind of thing. The shapes of the panels and where the panels are placed. So I think all those elements. Although I don't draw like Mike, and I think if I did try to draw like Mike, it just wouldn't work because it was you might as well just have Mike, as it were, if you see what I mean. So I never thought like drawing like him, but hopefully I can bring some of the same sensibilities, if that makes sense, as it were, kind of thing. And being in his world, you have to respect the way that certain things are drawn, if you see what I mean, kind of thing. Most of the time I get told, do it in your style, Laurence, but this is the kind of look that we're going for. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I do. And again, it's nice, and you do kind of learn from it as well, as it were, kind of thing. And every now and then he used to send me kind of put his notes on it, and it's really interesting because you just get an insight on the way that Mike is thinking and whatever else, kind of thing. So I've kind of totally enjoyed that time.
Was there a learning process for you? Was there a point where the trepidation, the nervousness about Mike seeing your work came to an end? And if so, was it a particular issue, or was it just a gradual process?
I think at the beginning, when the first 3 issues, for me, I just thought I would be there. And at that point, I started feeling comfortable, as it were, kind of like doing what I was doing. It was the Sledgehammer series. So I was drawing kind of like almost like a man in mechanical armor in World War II. And I'm just like having a blast because I'm having to sort out the references, which I'm loving, kind of World War II references with kind of monsters and kind of, it was also just practical. You have to send everything to him. So, and what I do is I send it every week. I send my pages in every week. So, that just kind of just worked for me, really. Like the kind of the fear, the fear goes. It has to go, as it kind of thing. So yeah, and no, just kind of I enjoyed it. It just worked really well. It's a small team as well, so not that many people involved. So you got the writer, you got Mike overseeing, and you got Dave Stewart as a colorist. So that's just fantastic. And he kind of, his role is really quite important because he brings it all together. So he like those colors that he uses, the palette he uses, is very much of that world, if you see what I mean, kind of thing. So the reds and things like that are used like sparingly.
Well, it's something that I've talked about with people who've worked on Hellboy and BPRD before. Is just how vital Dave Stewart is to that whole project.
Totally,
yeah. It's. I think, in all likelihood, in years to come, his influence on comic book coloring in general and comics wider is going to be analysed more and more and more. Because Mike's legacy is obvious. It's Mignola, it's Hellboy, etc., etc. But Dave, the way Dave handles color, if you look at kind of the pre-Dave Stewart era,
right?
Particularly with computer coloring coming in, when things look so
very garish and stuff.
I've got some X-Men collections,
right?
In the 90s, and it just makes your eyes bleed.
Bang!
Oh God!
I agree. But what's also good with Dave is the subtleties. So like for the different artists that he used in the BPRD, in BPRD, there's like 3 or 4 different artists, maybe a little bit more now. And he uses the same kind of palette, but he changes it a little bit to the artist, like the shading and things like that. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So that it works. It's really, it's all done on a really subtle level that works really well.
Thinking about your style again for a moment, the influence of advertising, the influence of graphic design. Would you say that you have a fairly analytical mind towards this kind of towards the way that you structure things, or is I like patterns. Kind of instinctive.
Oh, I like patterns and structure. Axel said that my layouts are instinctive. I remember him saying that to me ages ago, kind of thing. And again, I can only put that down to just reading lots of comics, as it were, kind of thing. So initially, I get the script, I read the script a couple of times, I do impulsive like roughs on the script or in a little sketchbook, as it were, and then the next step is the layouts, and about 90% of the time it comes out. Every now and then I'll get like stuck at something, kind of thing, and then I'll kind of have to go off and look at different things to be inspired, as it were, kind of thing. But generally it just kind of flow, it does flow out. And the layout side is the most difficult time, but the most enjoyable time, if you see what I mean. And in my head, the comic is pretty much fixed at that point, as it were, kind of, and then the rest of it is the art part, is doing the pencils and the inks. And like the pencils I leave them rough. If I'm like inking myself, I leave them rough enough so that I can to keep the inks fluid, as it were. And then the inks, again, I kind of, because I've not fully identified everything, they can be a little bit fluid as well, because I do worry sometimes that my stuff can get a little bit too stiff. So keeping it a bit loose kind of aids that side of it.
Because the reason I ask is although you gave up the 4-time job teaching, you've continued to do bits and bobs, workshops, things like that. And in order to teach, you kind of have to pick things apart. You have to see how they work. And I wonder if perhaps, your own journey has been one of just finding the confidence to pick things, to scratch beneath the surface and pick things apart and go, no, actually, I can do this. I understand how this is going to work.
Yes, I think there's certain moments, as I said, like the Steve Yoel moment and Zenith. But yeah, I think there is a kind of, I don't do it as much as some other people have done. I mean, I speak to other artists and I think to myself, oh my God, I thought I was quite kind of, should we say, controlling or kind of look. And then I speak to other artists and I realize I'm far from it, kind of thing. There are, amazing. There are people that count, like writers that count the amount of panels other artists, other writers have used, and then kind of work that out in their book and things like that kind of thing. So I think you'll be surprised on how far other creators do deconstruct stuff. But at the same time, I'm a firm believer of keeping things a little bit fluid and loose. So, kind of like a lot of people using 3D packages in their drawings and things like that, which is an idea, and I use it a bit. I kind of, but I'm kind of very aware that I'm not going to be totally drawn in with that, because I think you can lose the spontaneity and the cheats that you can do. I think cheating is really quite important when drawing a comic, as it were, kind of thing. And if you use everything like a 3D engine to do everything, and you don't question the panels, as it were, then that cheating aspect is going to go, if that makes sense, as it were. So, for example, if I use reference, but I don't let the reference control me, as it were. So if the reference looks odd, I will change it so that it makes it look right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's an interesting thing, because we had Tom Foster on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he. There's that wonderful video he did for us on the 2000 AD YouTube channel of him basically losing his mind. But early on, as he started working with 2000 AD, where he's going through such a convoluted process, printing things off and going over them and doing it, because he lacked the confidence to let go of that process.
I think a lot of it is confidence,
exactly. And I think one of the problems with even just using words like cheating, in terms of art, is that one man's cheat is another man's inspiration. You know? And absolutely, if all you're doing is getting a sketch or whatever it's called, or a poser, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then just doodling a few lines over the top, you might be heavily on one side of a very blurry line.
Well, I think what it does is that you could do that, and maybe you can get away with it. But you're missing so much more. So if you do it and you use it the same as a tool as you would use maybe a 2H pencil and a 3B, as it were. You use it for the bit that you need, but don't be afraid to kind of change it, if you see what I mean, because when it doesn't suit you. Because otherwise you end up, it's ruling you rather than you ruling it, as it were. But that's the way that I feel with it, if you see what I mean, kind of thing. So how did Tom feel with it? Did he kind of, as he shook his hands with it at the end?
Mostly. He's a lot more confident now. I think he, from what he said, he's eliminated a couple of stages of that particular process, which is good, and his. I mean, this is me editorializing, but his work on the A Penitent Man, which is the story.
Is that the latest one?
It feels a lot more him. And it's
a bit more relaxed.
I guess ultimately that is the journey, that is the process that all artists ultimately have to go through. Is you find the confidence to do what you want to do and to be yourself.
Yes, although if I'm honest, it's kind of. I mean, I've got into a certain style that I think some people expect, and I do enjoy doing, and I feel comfortable with it. But there's another part of me when I look at like Darwin Cook and things like that, and I'm like, oh, look at this! It looks so joyful, and it looks so kind of like you could just doodle it and it would just happen, kind of thing. And there's part of me who thinks that's where you should be going. That's where you should be. That's where your work should be going. To this point, forget the reference and just it'll just flow kind of thing. But it scares the hell out of me.
I mean, you've just when we talked about the whole swan analogy, you've done exactly that. You've looked at the swan and gone, oh, that looks
totally. Yeah. No one knows what other people are going through, as it were.
I mean, if you're going to aspire to an artist, then Darwin Cook is a hell of a summit to point yourself towards.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
In terms of what you've got coming up now that Hellboy, B.P.R.D is done with, and you've done the Strontium Dog with Rob. What's next?
I can't go too much because they've not really announced it, and I don't like kind of going against the rules. But I've got some kind of Dark Horse stuff coming out for a good while, and I'm kind of agreed to do another book, not for Dark Horse, after that.
Right.
And then I've agreed to go back to Dark Horse after I've done the other book. So technically, I've kind of nice-wise, if it does all happen, I've got about 2 years work kind of thing. And it's kind of nice and exciting and kind of varied stuff as well. So, yeah.
Because I completely forgot to talk about Old Haunts, which is the series with Rob. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's Old Haunts is by kind of Rob Williams and Ollie Masters. And that was done as I was coming up to the end of B.P.R.D. I got a message off of Axel saying that he was setting up a new company called AWA, and whether I'd be interested in kind of drawing something like that.
Is the studio falling apart?
No, that's my son stroking the cat and then hitting something. It must be lunchtime for him. So Axel was asking me if I wanted to do something, and then also at the same time, Rob and Ollie were pitching something, and it was like a crime book, like a horror story, and they asked whether I wanted to draw it. And to be honest, working with Rob is always great. I think he's a great writer. Ollie's a good writer, and I've got to know really well. So I thought, that just sounds like a fun kind of project. At AWA, Axel was there. I kind of feel like I owe Axel. So we done that. And of course, the first issue was about to come out, and bang, the pandemic came. And so it's really disrupted the whole thing. But that's probably my first official creator-owned book. And it went really smoothly. We'd done some things with the book. So early on, we all agreed that it'd be a widescreen book kind of thing, because that was the kind of feel that we were going for. Lee Lowridge coloured it, who I'd worked with on Punisher, but he really saturated the colours and done that thing of like knocking out the blacks and whatever else. So yeah, it was a fun book that seemed to flow really quickly. It got done really, really quick. It was good.
Because I guess that kind of overlap of crime and
crime and horror mixed together. It's an interesting thing because you feel like they should be kind of together, but at the same time you can see why they'd be poles apart, because a crime book has a sense of realism done to it kind of thing. So as soon as you bring a possibility of kind of supernatural horror to it kind of thing, it kind of it's a very careful balancing act. And that's what we were trying to do. And for me, the interest came with the horror. Wasn't so much of a huge, scary monster, but it was more what I spoke about earlier with that David Lynch type feel of like the thing out the corner of your eye. And it's that kind of, it's that sense, and a bit kind of It Follows of that overwhelming sense of dread that's coming. That's the thing that really interests me in that book.
That's a handy thing to ask, whether there's room for any 2000 AD in this busy packed schedule you've got for them.
As I said, there is a dread that is kind of, it was just a case of we'd have to write down a pitch and kind of and send it in. I'd be all over it. I would be all over it. Seriously, I had so much fun doing the Strontium Dog. My love is kind of like 2000 AD. I kind of, people don't know, but I think I had about 4 letters published in 2000 AD, but not under my own name, under pseudonyms, because it was that weird point where I was sending in fan letters and then also decided I was going to try and send in submissions, and I thought I can't use the same name. So I was sending in fan letters about how great Zenith was. And at the same time, also kind of sending in submission. And I think Dave Bishop just accepted me at the end, just purely out of pity because I'd sent in so many submissions.
I mean, to be honest with you, if that was the way that it worked, then there'd be one or two people who'd be working for us who wouldn't know. Anyway, I'm not going to.
I used to. I used to get the rejection letters, and even like the rejection letters I used to get, I used to see a positive in the rejection letters. So I remember once I got a rejection letter. I was like, oh, I was a bit down, but my mum cheered me up and whatever else. Then I got another one, but the rejection letter that I got for the second one came quicker. And I was like, hey, they must have liked it a bit more because the rejection letter come a bit quicker. They must have looked for it a lot more. And I used to just pick up on any ounce of like a thread that or positivity. I used to just grab and hold.
See, this is the danger. Ultimately, I think Matt needs to institute the Dave Bishop way of rejection letters, because my favorite one is the one that Spurrier got, which was just no. Well, thanks so much to Laurence for taking the time to chat. It was always great to hear from him and catch up. The thrillcast lockdown tapes continue. Fingers crossed weekly from now on for as long as need be. So I hope you're keeping safe and well, Earthlets. If you like your thrill power delivered through your ears, then there's plenty to keep you occupied during, the tail end of, fingers crossed, of lockdown. Don't forget that 2000 AD subscribers and magazine subscribers can access the Future Shocks radio podcast through the 2000 AD app. Now, we had Nat Tapley on just before Christmas to talk about these fantastic adaptations of classic Future Shocks, including work by Rob Williams, Alan Moore. I think there's a Grant Morrison in there as well. These are available through the app. So you go in, you log in using the details that you use to manage your subscription. You can listen to them absolutely for free. So please do go along to that. And don't forget also the Penguin Random House audiobooks, which are available through Audible and I believe some other digital platforms. There's also normal audiobooks from 2000 AD available on Audible. So head along there, including narration by William Hope, which is fantastic. He was in Aliens. Amazing. So we'll see you definitely, absolutely, in a week's time, Earthlets. So don't touch that dial, but do spread the thrill power. And until then, Splendid Verthrig.
Alert! 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 Thrill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com.